How's it going, everybody? My name is Antonio, and I'm back for some resource talks today with Andy Schectman, who, of course, needs no introduction. He's been in financial services and precious metals for longer than I've been on this planet for, and that's not a joke. Like, that's actually true. Who's not here with us today, though, is your financial advisor. They're never in these conversations because this is just a casual talk between two people who you've likely never met, and you don't even know if we have torsos and legs. I mean, for all you know, all you see is talking heads. So for as far as you as a listener or viewer are concerned, this is just going to be that. It's going to be a talk between two talking heads, a conversation that's general and impersonal in nature, as well as a conversation that will include no financial nor professional advice of any sorts. It's definitely not a conversation that you want to use as independent research, because it's also going to include a lot of forward-looking statements about uncertain events that may or may not take place in the future, which basically means we'll be doing a lot of guessing here. So please take the minute to pause the video and read the full warning that is on the screen right now, because investing involves taking a lot of risks, and a lot of people end up losing a lot of money, and you may end up losing your money if you don't understand what you're doing and what's going on. This is not just some disclaimer. This might actually end up helping you not lose money. With that all said, Mr. Schectman, thank you so much for investing your time with me today.
Good to see you, Antonio. Yeah, you had me until you mentioned that I was been doing this longer than you've been born. Man, I'll tell you, time sure flies, and I still feel like I'm 19 when I started this company, at least in my brain. My knees and my back, not so much, but it's good to be here, and happy to chat with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. I mean, you say you've been doing this for for about 25 years or something. So what did you start when you were 5?
No, I'm 53, just turned last week. I started doing this right before my 20th birthday, 1990. A company was started in 1989 by my father, and I came on board about 6 months later. And it's amazing when I think about it. I mean, I've done this for well over the majority of my life, and 2/3 of my life I've been doing this. So the one nice thing that I take away from it is that I don't know that there's ever been a day where I really rued getting up in the morning, where I've always enjoyed the pursuit of information and learning and education and bettering myself any way I can. And that's the one thing that this career has given me is the never-ending pursuit of knowledge that just, when I started, seemed to crawl, kind of like time when you're a younger person. And as I've gotten older, ironically, so too has the acceleration, not only of my age and the passage of time, which becomes noticeable, but also the speed at which things are accelerating in the ether, whether you're talking political, social, moral, economic, just the whole landscape, the Western hegemony landscape and everything associated with it seems to be rapidly accelerating, and not always in the best of ways, but certainly, as the Chinese curse eloquently illustrates, may you live in interesting times. These are anything but dull and complacent, which I kind of long for, to be honest with you, but interesting nonetheless. So looking forward to chatting about this with you today.
I do as well, but can you maybe expand more on what you just said right now? I mean, what when you say it's interesting times, maybe just be more specific about sort of your 40,000 foot view. If you get on an airplane and look down, what are you seeing? What are you focusing on? What are you liking? What are you not liking?
Well, I mean, just from a standpoint of being in the United States, the things that I don't particularly care for is the acceleration of things that were never really part of the American fabric growing up. I grew up where you tolerated, you respected people of different beliefs, different backgrounds. Tolerated isn't the right word. It's respected and understood. And that's where it ended. It's when we find ourselves in a world that is fixated on cancel culture and censorship, transgenderism, a world that has deviated so much from respect and transition to celebration, where you must embrace and celebrate people, even if they represent the minority, instead of respecting And the things that were so important to this country, religion, the nuclear family, respect of institution, respect of the judicial system, of law and order. These things are all denigrating and in an accelerating fashion. And I think that is one piece of the puzzle that is not lost, at least on me, I think on the majority of the Americans anyway, with their eyes open, and the rest of the world. That is a departure from the stuff I normally talk about, economics, whatnot, but I think it's part of a bigger puzzle. I mean, one without the other doesn't tell the whole story. And when you talk about what has made the United States special, it is liberty and justice, equally applied to everyone of all race, creed, culture. You're an American citizen, then you have the benefit of having the law equally applied to you or someone of much more higher standings or standards within the system. I think you know what I'm trying to get at here, and dancing around what is very openly obvious these days is the fact that in I think plain sight is things are not being administered equally. I mean, I've been saying lately, people have walked from Central America through 110-degree heat for weeks to get to a better life. People have tied together inner tubes with string and floated across the ocean from Cuba to find a better life, one that exemplified liberty and justice and getting away from authoritarian regimes that didn't do that, that would jail you if you said something wrong about the administration. And they come here to find a better life, only to find or question, is the law and is the justice system being applied equally anymore? And it's right in your face. On top of that, we have the global mismanagement of the world reserve currency. We've had more money printed in the last 4 years than in the history of the country preceding it. We have suppressed interest rates for the better part of a decade or longer. And along those lines, flooded the market with money, creating massive distortions and imbalances, misallocations of resources and capital, where price discovery became impossible. And now what is really putting a lot of strain on the domestic system here is that if you go back to January 1st, 2022, the interest rate on a 3-month treasury was 0.06%. That was January 1st, 2022. Here we are at the end of, let's say we're almost to September 1st of 2023. So what's that? That's 12 and 9. That's 21 months. So in 21 months, the interest rate, I'm just going to use this to make my point, on the 3-month treasury was 0.06. Today, it's over 5.5%. And so when you talk about the strain that has put on so much of the entire system, in particular the banks, things are not really, in my opinion, in a good shape here in the United States. And then you look at this growing chorus of countries around the world that are uniting together against the sanctions and the weaponizing of the dollar, against the Western hegemony and hypocrisy, where a country like the United States can go into Iraq and destroy and destabilize the country in the search of weapons of mass destruction, say, oops, we're sorry, we didn't find them, and there are no consequences for it. Yet we go around passing out sanctions in a way that I think the rest of the world looks as supremely hypocritical. And you look at Iraq, they just made trading in dollars for businesses illegal, punishable by jail time and losing your business. I don't know how excited they were to see us come and help. So, I guess from a 40,000-foot view, I'm not particularly optimistic on many fronts. Look, this is still the best country in the world, but so much of what has made this country great is being ripped apart and frayed. And, I don't know what bothers me more. if it is the gross mismanagement and weaponizing of the dollar, or the fact that this country is no longer unified. And there is anger between red and white and blue and red and, excuse me, black and white and blue and red and vaccine and no vaccine and rich and poor. And you just, you look around and you see a country that is a shadow or a shadow of itself from what I remember. And the worst part about it is that it seems to be accelerating. So I wish I had a more optimistic view. I got 3 kids, my youngest being 16. I don't like the world that they are heading out into. And I really think that as we get closer to the 2024 election, all politics aside, I think there's going to be a lot of things that will continue to rip this country apart at the seams. So short to intermediate term, I really am not very optimistic and on really anything in the markets other than doing all you can to become a contrarian and protect yourself from whatever it is that's coming down the pike, but it doesn't look good to me.
The word contrarian is interesting to me here because it seems like that's your opinion here is turning in sort of the popular opinion. I mean, you open up any news website and everybody's bearish on the economy in the US because bank stocks are falling. We're having bank troubles. China is apparently in huge troubles if you read the headlines, and it's turning to where the consensus now is bearish, short to midterm. And then you talk about contrarian. Well, that sort of makes me wonder or question, I guess, some of these assumptions and how valid are those? Because I guess as the saying goes, if there really is a saying of that sort, is that crashes don't happen when everybody expects them to. So is that I mean, it's superficial. There's no data or anything that I can present here or ask you anything, but is that something you've noticed or are you concerned about in any case?
Yeah, typically when everyone is on one side of the trade, it's best to become a contrarian and take the opposite side. But I don't know really how bearish the mainstream is. I mean, you keep hearing talks of a soft landing. Yes, certainly the hard asset people who have been saying this stuff for a very long time are, but I mean, let's take a look at it. You got a 30-year mortgage that just tripled in the span of a couple of years to its highest rate in 23 years at 7.5%. You got household savings in the United States, which totaled 2.1 trillion after the stimulus deal in 2022. It's been declining by over 100 billion a month, and now savings have been depleted to just 190 billion dollars remaining. So you have people have overextended themselves. Their savings have been depleted. Recently, credit card debt hit 1 trillion for the first time ever on household debt. All in total 17.1 trillion in household debt, but 1 trillion on credit cards. You have S&P and Fitch downgrading, or S&P and Moody's rather, downgrading 16 or 17 banks. You have Fitch downgrading the debt in the United States. And to your point, there are a lot of people out there that like Janet Yellen lambasted Fitch for fiscal irresponsibility and fiscal is the wrong word she looked at it as a very bad thing. She said nothing wrong with borrowing trillions and trillions of dollars and racking up more debt until you're 120% of GDP. That's a banana republic by every measurement. And she's saying Fitch is the crazy one, not us. But I mean, you go back and look at the classical definition of a banana republic, it's over 100% debt to GDP. We're almost 130, but at least we don't jail our political opposition the way the banana republics do in places like South America. Wait a second. Maybe we do. Maybe we aren't as great as the recency bias once had us believe. And I think people are stuck, those that would say these things, they're stuck in recency and normalcy bias. And I think that this is something that the mainstream is certainly very, very addicted to. I mean, how does the United States pay back $33 trillion in debt, which excludes Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government military pensions, which pushes our debt to $155 trillion against a $5 trillion asset base. This is all, Google it, you'll see this. You know what the largest asset is in this country? Student debt, representing over 40% of our assets in this country. Somehow they're considered an asset, but what's even more ridiculous is that they've been given a 3 or 4 year forbearance in payments, which resume again in September. Look at the amount. If you Google how many times, if you look at the Google Analytics, the phrase, what if I don't pay back my student debt? Can I go to jail for not paying my student debt? Can I default on my student debt? It's off the charts. People are freaking out. So they're drowning in debt, they're overextended, and all of this debt was accumulated at the lowest interest rates in human history. And now as rates are rising, I think that, you look, the one saving grace here for a lot of the public, at least right now, is that the majority, like over 90% of all the mortgages are under 5%, right? And 30% or so are under 3% or 3% or less. And so the housing market's not going to go anywhere until it breaks. These rising rates are more indicative of the problem with unemployment. And you're going to see mass layoffs. You're going to see companies go out of business. You're going to see forfeitures. And where that will really hurt is in the commercial real estate business, where the regional banks that are hanging on by a lifeline because of the rapid increase in interest rates hold 70% of all the small business loans and small and commercial real estate loans and leases. So the small business guy, which typically represents 40% of global of U.S. GDP, is getting obliterated. The middle class is being destroyed. Higher inflation, higher costs, raising rates, and the commercial real estate, $1.5 trillion worth that has to be reset over the next 12 to 15 months, will be almost triple what it was a couple of years ago. You're going to see big forfeitures, bankruptcies, commercial real estate implode, which will drag down the regional banks, which hold all of the loans and leases. There's not a pretty picture to be painted, and the problem is that most people in this country don't pay attention to any of this. They just watch Jim Cramer, who recently gave a buy signal on Bank of America. I think you're down 100, almost 50, 60, 70% on that. The point of it is that the information that people are getting from the mainstream is leading them right into the abyss. And if you don't see what's coming at you, you can't get out of the way of it. And I think that's really the problem here. So no, I don't think that the fact that everyone or a lot of people, at least the people you're focusing on, are bearish. I think those people, and myself included, are the distinct minority. People understand things are off, but I don't think anyone looks at the world quite through the same contrarian lens that I would right now. And I think that's really going to be a big mistake.
Well, Jim Cramer really is a unique case in this environment. He sure is. It's
one other thing. I'm sorry to interrupt you. One other thing that you mentioned. And you mentioned, if you look at the news, China's in big trouble. And I don't know if I see all of that. My take on it is a little bit different. Everyone, China's on the verge of collapse. No, I don't know about that. Look, do you see all the OPEC nations scrambling to form an alliance with the U.S. and the West? Why are they all willing to line up with Russia and China? Do you see the Chinese giving up on the Belt Road Initiative, the largest infrastructure project in human history that is currently encompassing 75% of human population? But what people don't understand is that in the difference between communism and capitalism, in communism, if private assets go belly up, they get nationalized and redistributed. If state assets go belly up, then they're just written off and they are redistributed amongst other state-operated enterprises. So it's different with communism, not to mention they have FU cash. They have FU money that they have been accumulating for a very, very, very long time. So their real estate market is over-leveraged and is in trouble. So what? I don't think, you look at where we are in the situation, and I would argue we're far worse off than they are. And we don't have virtually anything in the way of savings, and we're the world reserve currency with $5 trillion in assets against $155 trillion in debt, of which 40% is student debt. So, call a spade a spade. And when you talk about the full faith and credit of the U.S., okay, the credit, we're broken, we're insolvent, we're a banana republic. And look at the faith. We've weaponized the Justice Department. We've weaponized the FBI. We've divided this country, as I mentioned, into so many factions where you're defined by who you voted for in the last election, where if you go to dinner and you have to actually think about what you say with your friends and family before you say it so as to stave off a fight. That's not what this country was founded on. That's not what made this country great. It was freedom of speech and respecting law enforcement, respecting your family, your elders, your parents. None of that stuff happens anymore. There is a lack of respect, and it's in your face, and there's divisiveness. And so when you talk about the full faith and credit of this country, well, here again, think twice about that. We're broke. And I think our faith is being questioned by the majority of the world. And we can go in and weaponize the dollar and do all of these things through coercion. When you look at a country like China, who through the Belt Road Initiative and through their BRICS, they're going into countries under a mutually cooperative means. They're striking a relationship and brokering a peace deal between Iran and Iraq, the first railway ever built between the two countries. They have struck a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, two countries who have hated each other. There are embassies now in each other's countries. They're building roads and bridges and maritime channels and oil refineries and gold and silver mines. They are industrializing a good portion of the world. And through mutual cooperation, they are succeeding. So I think that's kind of the problem, is that everyone looks at the world through the fact that it's always been this way over the last 70 years. And that is true. But, all good things need to be reevaluated, even the best laid plans. And I think this is no different.
And all things come to an end. And I understand that. But the when question for me as an investor, for me, who's I'm 20 something and I'm trying to build my capital. I come from a lower class family, so I need to do it all on my own, right? So the when is really important to me, and this also brings me, and you talking about China also maybe brings me to talking about what's happening with the BRICS, because you've been vocal about that in the past. You said, and I'm gonna quote that. This is from an interview with INN. August 22 is the beginning of a major change in the world. End quote. This what INN says. But so, looking at what's come out of the BRICS summit that I assume you're referring to in August 22, it all looked like, well, a nothing burger, following the prices of gold, following what the dollar did. And that week, nothing really reacted in a way that would suggest to me that there's a new gold-backed currency or something has really changed that structurally. So, I mean, did August 22 mark a major change in the world?
Absolutely, it did. I mean, do you know what makes the dollar the world reserve currency? I mean, most people don't. And, well, one of which is the full faith and credit. We've already dispelled that myth. And the other is the deal that was struck between Kissinger and the Saudi Kingdom in 1973 or 1974, where we'll protect you, but you'll value oil globally in dollars through OPEC. And it's been that way for the better part of 50 years. And every single country on the planet, yours included, has had to stockpile dollars for 50 years to buy oil. And the fact that Saudi Arabia has now formally been invited into the BRICS, has applied to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, has applied to the BRICS New Development Bank, has joined, along with all the other OPEC countries, the largest infrastructure project in human history, the Belt Road Initiative, all the other OPEC countries, and has told everyone in Davos earlier this year that they are open to taking other currencies for oil. If that doesn't signal a massive shift, it's just the dollar's dominance is being weakened day by day. Now, I was very clear about something. I have said all along, I've been talking about this for longer than anybody. You can go back and they're all well documented. I've done over 1,200 videos on this subject going back to the end of 2019. Everyone thought I was crazy. No one was talking about it back then. Now everyone is talking about it. And I have said all along that they will issue a gold-backed currency. Why do I say that? Well, the Bank of International Settlements, which is the most well-funded, well-informed, powerful bank on the planet. They are the central bank or central bank, reclassified gold as the world's only other tier one reserve asset in 2019. And the central banks have been on a buying spree, whether it be methodically and privately or in your face open this last 15 months, that really underscores the way that they view gold as a massive importance or a peg to a new monetary system. And if you look at the Russian finance minister, Lavrov, I forgot his name, it's irrelevant, but he's been the one who's been saying this for almost 2 years, that their new BRICS currency that they are working on would be pegged to a basket of commodities, presumably most likely gold. Now, it was James Rickards, and I gave him credit. And in every interview I have done since he came out and said that they would issue that gold-backed currency August 22nd, I said, James Rickards, not only is he very well known and acclaimed and revered as being an expert, he worked for the CIA, was hired to go there and simulate financial war games. He's written several best-selling books. He came out and said this. I gave him full credit for it. I also said he has courage that I don't. I think in terms of big picture generalities. I think in terms of it's going to happen. You can see the RICS and BRICS, Russia, China, India, South Africa, they're the massive accumulators and producers of gold in the world. And they continue to accumulate and produce without selling any. And they will flip the switch when the switch is ready to be flipped. Certainly combining with 80% of the oil producing countries in the world, or the countries that produce 80% of the oil, is the first step in the process. But I never set a date. I said in a world of probabilities, I believe it is virtually inevitable that will happen. I never said when the date would happen, but what you do take away from this is that all of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union countries were invited to the meeting. They're going to join the BRICS as well. You put together the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which Saudi Arabia applied to, which is the largest financial and military regional group in the world, along with the Eurasian Economic Union, on top of the Belt Road Initiative. They're all connected. They are all connected systemically. They all have memberships, in many of them in all of the different unions. You're talking the majority of human population. It's a game of Jenga. I don't know if you've ever played Jenga, but it's a tower made of bricks, and you pull out one at a time, and the person who pulls out the wrong one when the whole thing collapses loses. Well, that's what this all is. Yeah, it's a nothing burger in terms of the immediacy of it. I said that in my presentations at Rick Rule's conference 2-3 months ago. And in every interview I said, no, the world's not going to change August 22nd, but it is going to change. It changed forever, but it's not going to change immediately. There's a term in economics or a term in statistics called logarithmic decay. It's like being on a river 4 miles back of a waterfall, a big one like Niagara Falls. And as you start moving, the slope slowly changes its pitch, slowly, little by little, then bang, all at once. So where are we on that logarithmic decay curve? I don't know, but we're on it, and you can sense it, that it is changing. And when you add into the mix that the number one economic advisor to the United States, Jared Bernstein, his main thesis, as picked up in articles he wrote for the New York Times and the Washington Post, where he openly calls for the dollar to lose its world reserve status, that we can't afford the privilege of maintaining the reserve status when it creates too many imbalances in trade and distortions. What better way to go down that path than to weaponize the dollar and to sign an executive order right in the face of Saudi Arabia, say, hey, we're going green, 50% by 2030 and 85% by 2050. That is the linchpin of the dollar hegemony. And to let them join all of these organizations, or to stand by and watch as they join these organizations and choose sides. At the same time, we are blowing up the faith in this country, and our credit is already gone. I mean, we're insolvent. We just can print our way out of this mess, I guess, until people realize that they're accepting a currency that continues to be inflated away, to nothing. And even though the CPI says inflation is coming down, the real levels of inflation are much higher. They keep changing the metrics by which they gauge it. So yes, it is a big deal, a really big deal. But to look at it as being the end of the world, August 22nd, people were missing the entire point. The point is that the dollar for a very long time has had no challengers. And you now see coming up from the ranks countries that by this year will outpace the GDP of the G7, the BRICS nations will. And will have a much bigger military might than the United States will when you combine two of the three largest nuclear arsenals in the world into this union. So yes, there are challenges ahead, no question about it. But I think that indeed August 22nd marked the beginning of the end of the dollar as the sole settlement currency for the world. And it may not happen this year. Maybe it does. Maybe it's next year. Maybe it's 2025. I don't know. But I think the inevitability of the dollar being challenged by a commodity-backed currency where the majority of all energy transactions are settling outside the dollar will have massive effects on the reserve status of the US dollar.
It's been interesting watching this develop as we go, because BRICS is not new. I mean, you say there's now a contender for the #1 spot, maybe, but the BRICS was founded. I mean, the idea for it came in 2009, and so the idea that they are going to do something has been around for a decade and a half now. They've been meeting, they've been talking, adding, removing countries, but nothing has happened yet, which to me suggests that maybe because the world is quite different than the last time that we had a functioning commodity-backed currency or a gold-backed currency, the world is quite different today than it was back then. The time that it's taking them to come up with something, which they haven't yet come up with anything specific, again, as far as I can see, is telling me that maybe it's way harder than we all thought, and that maybe it could come eventually to an end, but maybe it's going to take a lot longer than we all thought.
Yeah, it's 17 years in the making. There's no question. What accelerated it is the weaponizing of the dollar. That is galvanizing everyone's desire to find safety in numbers. And when you talk about the military might of the United States, this is something that must be done methodically. And you know, the Chinese have this in their culture. They think in terms of decades and maybe even centuries, where the US thinks kind of like you mentioned, you know, August 22nd, bang, why didn't it change? And when you look at the proliferation of cryptocurrencies and markets that have been literally exploding higher due to all of the money creation and suppression of interest rates over the last several years, people need immediate gratification. It's not soon enough for them. That fits right into the hands of the Chinese and the rest of these countries that are building an infrastructure based on trust, on cooperation. And I think it will play out. I think what has pushed the envelope to make it go faster is the weaponizing of the dollar, no question about it. And that's also what has given a lot of other countries incentive enough to, like Turkey, like Egypt, like the United Arab Emirates. These are our allies, and now they're choosing sides. When Macron from France says, I want to go, when Macron from France signs a 51-point trade agreement with China, ranging from 5G technology to military engagement, when he does a massive liquid natural gas deal with the United Arab Emirates and pays in yuan, sides are being chosen. When Mexico says they want to join BRICS, sides are being chosen. But this is not something that you do willy-nilly, like Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi found out. And, you know, you want to stand up against the Western hegemony and say you'll take other currencies for their oil, you better have your backside covered. And I think that's exactly what these countries are doing in a methodical fashion. They are building the infrastructure and doing it the right way. Nothing that will be lasting will just come up, you know, in a whimsical fashion. This has to be very, very, very methodical and well thought out. And I think that's going to be, you know, what the pundits and the naysayers will point back against. Well, it's taking, so it can't be. No, it will be. And when it is released, it'll be something that will be good enough to make the rest of the world say, damn, That's something I got to consider. And not until then, but you can see it is accelerating day by day by day. If you listen to all the speeches I've given this year, you'll hear me say this one phrase more than anything: little by little by little by little by little, then all at once. And I don't know when that all at once happens, but if you take a step back and look at what is happening, there is no question but that the dollar will be challenged. If we were a country that had a big wealth of savings and not all of these distortions that have been created in asset prices, if we were a country that had unity amongst the populace, the way we did after World War II and the Great Depression, I would say, yes, we have what it takes to pull our way out of this. If we were a country that had a manufacturing base, I'd say, yes, we can do this. But do we? We're not unified. We've given away all our manufacturing. We're fully indebted. And most people in this country can't write out a check for $400 to pay for a root canal or a blown out tire. So, no, I don't think that we are in the proper place to fight back against this growing trend. And how it all plays out, or what is the catalyst to enable the BRICS to come out and really try and put themselves out on the global stage, I don't know. But I will tell you one thing that's interesting is that China and Saudi Arabia and Japan, that typically the big buyers of our treasuries, well, they aren't doing it anymore. So even though we're selling tons and tons of treasuries, who's buying it? Oh, it's the American public. That's right. They're the ones buying it all, trying to chase yield because you're not getting it in a fragile banking system. So as the world dumps bonds, the American people are loading up into them. At the same time, when you look at the unfunded liabilities of this country, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government military pensions, the $130 trillion on top of the U.S. public literally lining up to buy bonds, the majority of all the debt that this country owes is to its own people. So is there a reason that they would want to foster a reset? Well, maybe. Maybe that's how they get people to take the new central bank digital currency that the Bank of International Settlements says everyone must have operational by 2025. Maybe they need to have an event. I don't know. But all I can tell you is a country that should be clinging to its world reserve status instead is doing everything they can to make the rest of the world run to a new union of countries that do it under mutual cooperation and respect rather than coercion. And I think it's changing. I really do.
But that's an interesting point with the treasuries, because as far as I understand it, it's really all about treasuries. You mentioned that it's mostly about oil, and that was interesting because China and Japan, I think China, Japan, the UK, between the three of them own like $2.5 trillion worth of the U.S. treasuries. So, well, they're not necessarily incentivized to see the dollar die off because that's going to kill off their investments, of course. And then also the vast majority of foreign reserves, well, not the vast majority, but I believe like about 60% or so of foreign reserves on a global scale is held in US dollars. So surely you cannot dump that into the market because you're going to kill off your own investment, right? So as long as there's demand as long as there's demand for that, there's demand for dollars. As long as the U.S. is in a trade deficit, there is demand for dollars. Because if you want to deal with the U.S., you deal with it in dollars. So does deficit and U.S. treasuries not matter more than what's happening with Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think they're hand in hand. I mean, because part of the deal we had with Saudi Arabia is that they would take the profits from their sale of oils and recycle them back into treasuries. They're not doing that anymore. In fact, when their treasuries come due, they're not rolling them over. They're selling them, as is China, as is Japan. So they're not. And you're right. They wouldn't want to cut off their nose to spite their face. That's why I say little by little by little. Look, the U.S. over the last 4 years has printed nearly 80% of all the dollars in circulation. And to put that in perspective, in 2024, there was $4 trillion in circulation. There's now $19 trillion in circulation. That's a 375% increase in 3 years. And we're going to pay the price for that. And, I think that the issue with the Treasury market, look at last year. I mean, it was the worst year ever on record for the 10-year Treasury. And so what's going to happen with rates now? Are they going to continue to go higher? I don't know. What happens to the banks who are loaded up with longer duration treasuries. And as these banks continue to run into problems, I mean, there's huge banking problems, unrealized losses of almost $1 trillion in the banking system. And as more banks fail and are forced to meet redemption demands, which is happening, then they'll be forced to sell their longer duration treasuries, which will put them out of business, which will raise rates even further. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It'll crush the whole system. You know, the U.S. Treasury market is the only one big enough and liquid enough, people say, in order to maintain this orderly market. But here again, what really is standing behind the Treasury, right? It's the trust of the U.S. government. Here we go back again. Is the trust of the U.S. government really something that is in good standing? Does the rest of the world really trust the U.S. government anymore? And are we going to continue? How do we pay the unfunded liabilities of $130 trillion? Look, a trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. How do you pay off 130 trillion in debt? That's not even talking about the 32 trillion national debt. But how do you pay that off in a rising interest rate environment where rates keep going? You will expend every single cent of tax revenue just to pay the interest on the debt. That doesn't even talk about keeping the lights on. That's just the interest. So, you know, what are we any longer? If we're going to lose the petro status at some point, or it is already happening, look, you could say it's already gone because the deal we struck with Saudi Arabia is that they would only sell their oil in dollars. They're already selling it to China for yuan. At what point does it really start to accelerate where the world just doesn't want to hold a currency that is going to inflate its way out or default or find a villain, one of the three? I've been saying for a while, I think they'll try to find a villain. That would be Xi Jinping, Putin, and OPEC. Blame it on them, not the gross mismanagement and the massive, you know, fiscal and monetary stimulus that has destroyed the dollar while suppressing interest rates. But how do you pay it off? We can't produce it off. You can't raise taxes ultra high. So what do? You inflate. That's what all governments have done since the beginning of time. They will destroy the value of the dollar. And at what point does the rest of the world no longer want to accept an inflated dollar from a hypocritical regime that is losing faith and confidence around the globe? At what point do they just find another alternative? And I think that alternative to the U.S. Treasury will be gold, and it is in many respects is gold when you realize that the central banks, which are the most well-funded and well-informed traders on the globe, have bought more gold than at any time in the last ever in the last 15 months, ever the most gold that they've ever bought. So they understand it, and they're front running. They're front running, I think, the inevitability, and they're using the suppression of the Western markets, the levered futures markets, to run cover for draining the exchanges and for taking possession of massive amounts of gold and silver, which I think, what is it again, by the way? The only other tier one reserve asset will be part of a new system when they flip the switch. Don't know when that's going to be. I never thought it would be August 22nd, but it will come. It'll come when all of their pieces are in place. They're building their chessboard, I guess.
You asked an interesting question, one that I've been asking myself there. You asked what still supports the US dollar if trust is eroding. Well, that's a good question. And I think I have three answers to that. You tell me if they're right or wrong. And they're very culturally based, at least in my view as a European. And that's that the US does three things and does quite a lot of it too. The US takes out a lot of loans. So a lot of the US debt is held by either intergovernmental by governments, by foreign governments, or by its public debt, but it's held by foreign banks. So I think about half of it is actually outside of the country. So the US takes out big loans. The US consumes a lot. So US consumers on average have larger cars, larger houses, and so on and so forth. So you guys consume a lot, which means that when you consume, when the US says, oh, you know, China, we're going to buy your computers, and China says, that's great because I want more customers. Well, we're going to buy it, but we're going to buy it in dollars. And then the third thing that you guys do is fight a lot of wars. And so what backs the US dollar is US treasuries, it's U.S. consumerism, and it's it's the U.S. military in a sense as well. And I guess for its hegemony to end, would these three things have to end as well?
Yeah, I mean, you could argue the military-industrial complex. That's, yes, it certainly, those are the things that would have to end, but they are ending. First of all, in terms of the consumer, as I mentioned, they have nothing in the way of savings. It's virtually nothing in the way of savings. The first time ever credit card debt hit $1 trillion, 17 trillion in household debt. Interest rates are rising. So you say, buy bigger cars and bigger homes. For the last decade, you could buy a car and take motors for 0%, 72 months. And now those rates are 7 or 8%. You could buy a house 2 years ago at 3%, and now they're almost 8%. So the consumer is cash strapped. The businesses that employ these consumers are finding it harder and harder and harder to stay in business in an environment where the rates keep going higher and higher and higher. The cost of doing business has never been more expensive. So they will lay off people who may have a 4 or 5% mortgage on a $500,000 house. Sounds great right now, right? But not when you can't make the payments. So there will be defaults and there will be bankruptcies. Right now, this last month was the highest filing for bankruptcies ever in this country. So you're seeing bankruptcies, you're seeing huge indebtedness, you're seeing nothing in the way of savings, and interest rates going higher. So the houses and the cars that you talked about, is that a thing of the past? Don't know. You tell me. Have we sucked as much out of the Keynesian-based debt system where you incentivized to take on debt? That's what Keynesian system is all about, debt and spending and consumption. Well, when interest rates are at zero, that's why they suppressed interest rates for so long. Interest rates are supposed to be controlled by the market, not by the bankers. And the bankers suppress interest rates to create this perception, this illusion of prosperity. But when interest rates rise to where they really should be, to factor in the risk of this country and its indebtedness, well, you tell me, will that be something that we continue to see where the West consumes and consumes and consumes? We've had the privilege of being the world reserve currency and to be able to print whatever we wanted. And when you talk about the amount of money that's been printed, like I said, 375% increase in the last 4 years, where did all that money go? That money went into asset prices, stocks, bonds, real estate, cryptocurrencies, all of that stuff, which has been distorted because of the misallocations of resources and capital. The distortions in asset prices are supreme, as is the demand that was fostered out of it. So yes, that is the way that it was. But like you said earlier, all things come to an end. Are we near the end? I don't know. But I will tell you that I think it's a fact, a trend of reducing holdings of U.S. treasuries has emerged. Saudi Arabia's holdings of treasuries fell to a 6-year low this month, or in June rather, and as has net selling by 80 billion by the United Arab Emirates. And so, that was Saudi Arabia's. 4 billion from the United Arab Emirates. So the oil producing countries that were our allies are shedding treasuries and not rolling them over. China and Japan are shedding treasuries. Are we supposed to believe that it's the Cayman Islands that is the big buyer of treasuries in the United States? It's not a shell corporation run by the Federal Reserve monetizing the ass. I mean, there's a lot going on, and what this system also lacks is transparency, because when you have a questioning of integrity and honesty and there's no transparency, do you really believe a lot of these things? But all I can tell you is that I think the U.S. is overdrawing on its credit and its reputation. And look, forever there was no better alternative to the U.S. dollar, and the strong economic power allowed the dollar to remain and to maintain its hegemony. But things are changing. And now you have the new development bank, which can also make a lot of these loans outside the dollar. You mentioned the U.S. makes all of these loans. Well, the new development bank, which is kind of like, I think it would be like maybe like the IMF, they are now going to issue loans to all of these other developing markets, and many of them will be outside the dollar. So little by little by little, you make good points. But I think a lot of the points you make are also wrapped in recency and normalcy bias. My point is to change and challenge the narrative. Have we crossed the Rubicon of normalcy? Are we entering into a new system? And that's kind of how I feel. I mean, look, the dollar is affected by political, social, and economic instability. And look around you. I mean, if you're here in this country, you see political instability, you see social instability, and you sure as hell see economic instability. So where does that leave the dollar in the grand scheme of things? It's the nicest shirt, the best smelling shirt in the dirty laundry basket. And, you know, what if all of a sudden there's a new shirt that appears, one that has a backing of commodities, one that is settling the majority, over 80% of all the oil sales in the world, one that is being dispersed among the majority of human population. And we're not there yet, but you can see that the chessboard is lining up to where that is where they're trying to go. Will they be successful? Only time will tell. But I wouldn't bet against them.
What would that look like? What would a new shirt look like? Though you say it's a commodity, but is it an energy backed? Is it a gold backed? And how does that even work? I mean, we haven't really seen a situation in which that works.
You use distributed ledger technology. You don't make it redeemable, because President de Gaulle from France proved that redeemable currencies convert. In 1971, he literally drained all the gold held at the New York Fed because he believed we were printing more dollars than we had gold backing the currency held at the Treasury to fund the Vietnam War. And so he's sent warships over to New York Harbor and said, filled with dollars, said, give us our gold. And we did. We closed the gold window. So, yeah, I mean, what does it look like? It looks like a situation where the dollar no longer has the this globalization trend that we've seen forever. Well, if the dollar's not accepted, we have to start doing things here at home. We need to. I mean, I, for one, if I had my druthers, I would close all the military bases around the world. I would protect our borders. I would use the money that we are wasting on other parts of the world to build up the infrastructure in this country. And I think, look, you look at the stupidity of this country, the things that we are doing in this country are just asinine. And you look at, like, for example, what happened in Maui, decimated, and this is the United States, right? It is a United States territory, decimated Maui, and Biden gave him a $700 check per family. And yet we're giving $150 billion to the Ukraine in a war that we should have no part of. We've let our borders become a sieve that has seen over 6 million people enter illegally. And the largest, or when you talk about what is killing the teenagers in this country, the largest cause of death in the United States is fentanyl poisoning for teenagers. I mean, we are doing things completely bass-ackwards. And I think, what would it look like? We would be forced to take care of ourselves instead of being the policemen of the world. But I don't think it would be a pleasant experience, because if every country on the planet dumped dollars at some point, slowly shedding them, not buying the Treasury, slowly shedding them, bang, drop them all because it just became obvious, you're talking a tsunami of inflation that incites hyperinflation, and interest rates go to the moon. What happens to stocks, bonds, and real estate and the dollar? If the dollar is dumped globally because you no longer need to take it for oil, 80% of the world is buying oil in another currency, and all of a sudden, what happens when those dollars hit our shore? What happens to traditional assets when interest rates spike? And they're coming from a sky-high valuation. You tell me, what does it look like? I don't think it would be a pretty picture, but it's something that I think ultimately we will have to deal with, the loss of the singular or the loss of the dollar of being the sole settlement currency for oil. So I don't think it's a pretty picture at all. The bigger question is, when does it happen? Because in my mind, it's all but inevitable that we are heading down that path. And, when you see an administration openly tell the Saudis that we're going green and we're not going to need oil in as short as 6 years, 5.5 years, that was the executive order that was written. Why would they want to partner with us? So I think it's something that, when it happens, becomes something that's pretty ugly.
Well, inevitable and imminent is a big difference that can cost a lot of money, or it can have a high opportunity cost. So that's sort of the thing that I'm thinking about. But going back to what would replace the dollar, do you believe it's going to be something that's still centralized? Do we go sort of like how we went from the Dutch currency to the British pound, then to the dollar, and now we go to the yuan or whatever it might be? Or do you think it becomes more decentralized and just more global trade happens in more currencies?
At first, it's going to be a lot of settlement in local currencies. Yes, I wouldn't be surprised to see at the very end of all of this restructuring, 2 currency blocks, one issued by the IMF, one issued by the BRICS, something along those lines, where you see an attempt by the BRICS to issue a reserve currency, not just a settlement currency. Look, even Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, came out and said that a CBDC that is not backed by something is another fiat currency. What did the BIS say? And they're right above the IMF. They said gold is a tier 1 asset. The IMF wrote a report about 8 months ago that said, was entitled something to the extent of gold as an international reserve currency, a barbarous relic no more, ? So would it be the IMF issues a Western-based settlement currency pegged to gold on using a distributed ledger to show the veracity and the immutability of it? The Russian finance minister said a basket of commodities, but I have a feeling that it'll primarily be gold, maybe all gold. I don't know. But I do think, as Zoltan Pozsar said, that we are entering an era that he calls Bretton Woods 3. Bretton Woods 1 was when we did take over from the pound sterling in 44. Bretton Woods 2 was when we closed the gold window, and we struck a deal 3 years later with the Saudis. And Bretton Woods 3, as Pozsar, who now has his own fund, he worked for UBS, he worked for the New York Fed, says is a system based on commodities and transparency. Well, you don't need to make it redeemable if you use blockchain technology to show what every country pledges and have it audited, have it transparent, have it audited independently. Hell, we believe that the Iranians, whatever the people inspecting the Iranian nuclear facilities were telling us, we believe. So why would it be hard if you have independent auditors walking into the BRICS Bank, let's say, and auditing? Wouldn't it be very hard to audit the metal or whatever it is that is being pledged to the new system to give it veracity? And even if they only pledge, every new BRIC currency has 10% backing. Who knows? James Rickard says that he believes that every new BRIC will be worth 1 ounce of gold, period. And that if they do it that way, they'll let the West destroy themselves all by themselves. And what he meant by that is that if we continue to inflate to pay off all of our funded and unfunded liabilities, that the dollar will go down, gold will go up, the BRICS win. If they try and compete with the rest of the world and accumulate gold, gold goes up, the dollars go down, the BRICS win. Any way you look at it, I believe any new system that will inspire any confidence whatsoever must be pegged to something. And I think gold is the most logical choice. Why else was it reclassified tier 1? Why else have the central banks been buying it and repatriating it, not only from the New York Fed, but the Bank of England? There are too many things lining up. And again, this is a progression of events, and people are too obsessed with instant gratification. This isn't going to be something that will bang materialize. You got to watch the progression. And, I think the Western media is going to do all they can to make people think you're not on the right track. I believe otherwise.
I agree that it's important to watch these things. All these conversations that I really have on these channels are important conversations. And I talk to people who have all different kind of opinions. I think there's about 4 opinions on this topic. Yours seems to fall towards one end, is people who are closer to the middle, and people who are all on the other side, where they say de-dollarization is never happening. I see ongoing de-dollarization in some spots of the world, but the dollar is still the main currency used in many other transactions, just global transactions, not only oil. If you take everything together, you count it up, the dollar has been hovering at around 90%, sometimes lower, sometimes higher, for longer than I've been around. So there is not much of de-dollarization happening in terms of major transactions. And also, I'm thinking, when you say it's a when question, so when it starts falling, how low do you think it's going to fall? I mean, the British pound's been around for what, 1,200 years now. Sure, it's no longer as big of a part as it was before, but it's still around. So do you think the dollar disappears, or do you think it falls from 90 to like 70%, and that makes all the difference? Or how do you see developing? How do you see that developing?
I think it will 100% use, I think it'll be the loss of settlement that will dramatically begin to affect its reserve status. You're right. When you have the countries that comprise over 80% of the oil sales in the world all joining together, yes, I think it will begin to erode the value, or the reserve value of the dollar and its settlement value. I mean, if all of these countries are settling outside the dollar, it's going to change the landscape. And I don't know what that number comes to. I mean, I just looked at, it's about 80+%, 85% of all the global Forex transactions are still in dollars. But look at its role in terms of its how much is in countries' reserves. In 2022, the decrease in reserves was 10 times what it was the year before. So the numbers keep, in terms of countries holding dollars as a portion of their reserves, continues to decrease. So yes, I do believe that the dollar is still, like I said, the best smelling shirt in the dirty laundry basket. But at what point does settlement that continues to happen outside the dollar begin to erode the reserve status of the dollar? That's a question that only time will tell. But I do think it is inevitable. I mean, you have to ask yourself, if you produce things of value, do you really want to accept a currency backed by nothing but a mountain of debt, and, you know, very little in the way of assets to back it up, but a printing press and a military, when the groups that are joining together have combined greater GDP and a bigger military presence and a larger asset base? So I don't know. I just think it's an inevitable, and it's just a matter of what sets the fuse off. That's anyone's guess. I look at this progression of events that continues to happen unabated. The one thing I will refuse to do is be dissuaded by events that everyone is waiting for an immediate outcome. I've been at this for far too long. No, that never happens. But the fact that you have all of these countries joining together is a bigger picture. And, you know, it's like you watch all your friends in high school go to a party and you're not invited to it. And even though they didn't have a party, but they all met for a few days, you know, what's going on? I mean, is there something I should be part of? I mean, you can see it if you look closely enough, but you must train yourself to not be deterred by the lack of instant gratification. More importantly, look at the fact that these things have never happened, at least in all of our lifetimes. The dollar has never had a credible challenger. The euro really wasn't a credible challenger because they didn't have anything behind it. You had too many differences in cultures. The same thing could be said of the BRICS nations. But if you use the glue, that being a commodity, backing a system and using blockchain technology to show the immutability and the veracity, and you make a system based on mutual cooperation and respect rather than coercion, you got a real fighting chance. And that's really what I'm getting at.
So I don't really know what it's like not to be invited to a party, because I'm sort of like the Balkans of the world. I just never got invited to any party, so I don't know how it feels to be left out. But jokes aside, what about the euro? I mean, I guess I'm kind of biased because I'm in Europe, but if I look at Russia's exports of everything, basically, I see a growing importance of the euro in there. I think it's about a third now or something along those lines. It might be a little bit less now, but the euro is being growing as in importance as the European Union is being growing. Do you see the euro following the same fate as the dollar eventually?
I do, absolutely. And, the euro, they have a debt crisis just like the West does, and just like the United States does. And they're very similar to us. The difference to say that they haven't been part of the problem in terms of, speaking about Russia, I mean, they sanctioned all the assets from Russia as well, not just sanctioned, they confiscated them. They openly told Putin they were using them to rebuild the Ukraine. So, I think you see the same questioning in the Eurozone. And I think you'll see a lot of fracturing, like the countries that have had permits to trade within the Eurozone, but aren't part of the union in terms of using the euro currency. I think they're all going to leave. Like Hungary, Turkey, I think they have applications to, they have signed a treaty to trade with the European countries, but they don't now. They've decided to join the BRICS. I think you will see the Czech Republic. A lot of these countries will move away from the European Union. France, he wanted to be invited. He asked to be invited, and he was turned down. But the point is, at some point, you're going to see these countries break ranks. What is the G7? You got Italy, the European Union, Great Britain, Japan, Canada, and the US. They're all broke. They're all insolvent. Every freaking one of them. And, are they all going to break rank? I mean, look, the fact that Macron did a 50-point agreement, 50-point treaty in terms of trade agreements with China, and the fact that they're buying liquid natural gas in yuan, I mean, they're breaking ranks. They're not being allegiant to the West. At what point is it every man and woman for themselves? We're not there yet. You can see France is a couple steps ahead of other countries as well. But I don't look at the European Union any better at all than the West. They're probably more dysfunctional. The one thing that they don't have is the global reserve currency. But they're no better off than the West. And I think, indeed, when you talk about a new system, I think it would be the European Union, those that don't break ranks, and the United States and Great Britain. I don't know about Japan. I'm assuming Canada would be in there. I don't know about Australia. But I think a lot of these countries would form the Western Bloc versus the Eastern Bloc. And I think the only way you have credibility is to have it backed by something. You can't take my word for it anymore. You have to have something backing it. And to me, there's no question that is inevitable. So I guess only time will tell, But no, I do not believe the European Union is any better off than the United States in the grand scheme of things.
This channel is called Resource Talk, so we might eventually have to talk a little bit about resources and commodities. And this might be a good follow-up question. What if we had a commodity super cycle before it all started eroding, meaning most commodities are now settled in the US dollar? And if we had a commodity super cycle, and if it does, how does that influence or slow down or speed up the whole thesis that you're working with here?
Who owns and produces the majority of the commodities? Who's the biggest gold importer and producer in the world? Where does the majority of all of the commodities come from? Rare earth metals, platinum, palladium, oil. I mean, so much of the commodity infrastructure is found in the BRICS countries. And so I think that would only benefit those countries exponentially. I mean, it would really benefit Russia. It would really benefit China. The countries in the Eurasian continent hold the majority of all the rare earth metals. You have the second largest exporter of oil in the world in China. You have most gold accumulated and produced in China. India, close second in terms of importation. So I think it would certainly benefit the countries that have been accumulating. I mean, who bought up 90% of all of the zinc disappeared off the LBMA last year? 75% of all the aluminum disappeared. Where did it all go? Who do you think's buying it all? It ain't us. It's the BRICS nations. It's China primarily. but they're buying all of these commodities. They're accumulating all, and they're not just buying commodities, they're buying and building oil refineries throughout the world in the countries that they are developing. Oil refineries, gold mines, silver mines, rare earth mines. They're building them and infrastructure to bring them to market, which will be sidestepped by Western settlement. They're not going to value them. They're going to settle them in local currencies until they have a common a settlement currency. Don't know when that's going to be. They said they're going to bring it up. They want all of their finance ministers to really research this and bring their findings to the next meeting, which is in Russia next year. So I don't know, but I don't think it would benefit the United States, a country that supposedly has over 8,000 metric tons of gold, which hasn't had it audited since 1956. Why do they keep shooting that down? Alistair McLeod, who might be one of the smartest guys in the world, says China has 38,000 metric tons of gold, even though they only claim they have a few thousand. Excuse me. He surmises that the public has 18,000 metric tons and the state over 20. That would be almost 5 times what we have. Is that the truth? I don't know. The point is that I don't think if there were a commodity supercycle, it would benefit anyone but the BRICS.
Okay. I was just thinking how it influences the price of the dollar, if that makes sense, like the value of the dollar relative to the other currencies.
Well, look at it this way. If you look at, let me give you the name of it real quick. I always forget the name of this. The name of it is you put a dollar sign in front of XAUWCU, and that is gold priced in the major currencies of the world. It's a basket of currencies and economies from the 20 largest economies in the world. And it's up 59.64% in the last 5 years, up almost 10% this year. In other words, the commodities are all going up against all the other currencies right now. It's just not going up against the dollar because for some stupid reason, the dollar is still very, very strong, which makes no sense. I mean, it's literally makes no sense. 5 trillion in assets backing 155 trillion in debt. I mean, it makes no sense. So I think that you look at the rest of the world, gold has been one of the best performing assets there is over the last 5 years, over the last decade. It's just a matter of, in terms of being valued in dollars, it distorts its real value.
Right, but to settle, you will need more dollars. I mean, if you want to buy,
what if the Moscow exchange? What are you going to do when you realize that the open interest in silver on the COMEX is, I don't know, most months 20, 30, 40, 50 times greater than the bars that are backing it? What if everyone stands for delivery and they get cash settled and the COMEX just goes poof? What about all of the gold and silver that are being delivered off of these exchanges in what seems to be very preemptive fashion by the most sophisticated traders on the globe? It is not easy to take money or metal off the LBMA or off the COMEX. Why are they doing this? Why are they delivering it outside the walls of the COMEX ecosystem? And what happens when the Moscow exchange, which was, when they built it, they said, look, this is specifically to challenge the corruption of the Western price settling systems, or the Shanghai Gold Exchange, or the Shanghai Futures Exchange, or any of the other exchanges in the Middle East, where at some point is the price setting mechanism by a system that is corrupt, that is allowing the futures market to dictate the price rather than the underlying commodity in a way that is completely manipulated, where you don't have to be a genius to look at the AM fix and the PM fix and look at it over a long period of time and say that's how markets work, where it goes straight down every time, almost every single day. The AM fix and the PM fix, they knock the hell out of it, where it is suppressed and manipulated at 30, 40 times leverage, where the head trader for JP Morgan, who paid a $960 million fine to the Justice Department, and the guy that ran the trading desk are both sentenced to prison last week. So, I mean, when you talk about a corrupt price setting mechanism where everything is set in dollars, what happens when the rest of the world says, we don't want to do that anymore? we're going to use a different system. And you guys can do what you want on your side of the pond, but we're not taking anything from you, buy or sell at your bullshit prices. So yes, recency bias, normalcy bias, focusing on the Western system, that is being called into question. So to your point, yes, right now, debt and commodities are settled in dollars, but what about all the commodities that are being settled outside the dollar right now? And all of the transactions that are being settled outside the dollar? At what point does that become not just a trend in motion, but a preeminent trend? At what point does it just become reality? At what point does a market that trades, I don't know how many hundreds of times more than the entire global mine supply in one day on these markets, when there's a fraction of the gold and silver backing those contracts, at what point does it just become bullshit? We're not quite there yet, but we're inching closer and closer and closer and closer to it. So yes, to your point, which is valid, right now, all of those loans and all of these commodities, the majority of them are settling in dollars until they don't. And that's the little by little by little process. So they are building the infrastructure, like the Shanghai Gold Exchange. How about the fact that the Petro Yuan bond is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange? Where do you think Iran's getting all their gold to join BRICS? Well, I'll tell you, they sell their oil to Shanghai for a bond denominated in yuan, which is immediately convertible into kilo cash and carry bars off the exchange. So little by little by little by little, and the Western system is going to be called into question, where it has been suppressed forever to maintain the strength, this illusion of strength in the US bond market and in the dollar, because of a term called Gibson's paradox, which is the inverse relationship between real interest rates and gold. Even though rates keep climbing, the real interest rate in the United States right now might be 1% if you're lucky. It's probably negative still when you back out inflation from the interest you're being paid. But at some point, I believe those markets will be shunned for not only being the cause of a lot of pain and distortions, but also just being called out for what they are, bullshit. And that's why I think you'll see the rise of places like the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Although they have a smaller futures market, the majority of the gold that comes off the Shanghai Gold Exchange is cash and carry. Here's the price, take it. It's not about distorting that price with futures contracts. It's about valuing it properly. And the reason they're not bitching right now, the reason they're letting the West continue to suppress the prices, because it's falling right into their hands. They're standing for delivery. They don't care. Why do you think you're seeing massive deliveries off of COMEX? Why do you think you see the central banks buying more than at any time ever? Where are they getting it from? Well, I'll give you two hints. LBMA, COMEX, and the rest of the world. A lot of it comes through recycling in Switzerland. The point of it is when you're accumulating it, it's ninjutsu. You use your opponent's leverage against them. They're levering things up to make the dollar seem better than it is. They don't care. They're like, thank you very much. I'll take some more, please. And they're standing there and taking delivery. And when you take delivery of 100-ounce gold bars or 1,000-ounce silver bars or 400-ounce gold bars, it ain't easy. It ain't easy. And what are you going to do with it when you got it? A 400-ounce gold bar worth almost $1 million. Good luck on selling that or sending it anywhere. The point of it is these players are so big and sophisticated, they don't care. It's a one-way ticket and it ain't never coming back. So yes, your point is valid until it's not. And I think it will be rendered not at some point when the exchanges are exposed. These fractional scam exchanges are exposed for what they really are. It's a Ponzi scheme. And when just like the nickel market and the LBMA, you'll see the same thing with silver at some point, where we don't have enough silver backing all of the contracts. And if everyone stands for delivery, poof, now what? Then the system is rendered screwed.
I appreciate your patience with trying to explain these things to me. I'm not easy to explain things to. And I wish those were my points. This is mostly stuff that I regurgitate that I've read from other people. So it's helpful that you're taking the time to explain that to me. But what I was getting to, and to your point, what if it's almost the end of the month? What if at the end of the month everybody stood for delivery of gold and the price, let's say it doubles, it goes to 4,000 an ounce. Well, now given that now most, like, about 90% of all the transactions out there happen in the US dollars. Well, now to buy an ounce of gold, I will need twice as many US dollars. So I'm going to have to increase my demand for US dollars over the short run, potentially pushing the DXY higher. I mean, is
or
that
perhaps just settling it in different currencies?
Hmm.
Why is it so hard to think that if they're going to sell oil in other currencies, that they wouldn't sell gold in other currencies as well? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But that's all part of the same thing. You know, I mean, just because, okay, well, to your point, does it really push up the price of the dollar? No, it doesn't. It drops the value of the dollar. If everyone is taking their dollars and buying gold with it across the world, that means you're basically shedding dollars. And yes, you're paying for it with gold, or to buy the gold, but then what? You don't have the dollars any longer. You have gold in its place. So ultimately, if everyone sells dollars to buy gold, gold goes up, the dollar goes down. It creates more demand if you don't have any and you can only pay for it in dollars. But I think that's going to change, and you'll be able to start paying for it in other settlement currencies. And maybe someday it is a BRICS currency. I don't know when that happens. But what I do really believe is that ultimately we are witnessing, and I don't know what inning in a 9-inning baseball game we're in. Are we in the top of the third or the bottom of the ninth? I don't know. But I do know that when I take a close look at all of the unions that are being made against the dollar and the logic for doing it, it grows every day with significance and reality. And I don't know when the last pitch is thrown, and I don't know how it all plays out. But I do believe that when it's all said and done, the COMEX will be something that is no longer part of the game. It'll be something that has been exposed and rendered as being a complete scam, where 4 or 5 large commercial banks can control the price of the metal based upon having deeper pockets and being able to create a perception of reality through levered futures contracts. In a world where everyone wants commodities, that ain't going to fly. You can only suppress or manipulate a market for a very long or extended period of time by pushing it in the direction that it is going. And there has never really been this kind of demand opposite the dollar and for commodities. And if Zoltan Pozar is right, and we are entering a period of time dominated by commodities, then the COMEX is in big trouble. That I do believe.
I had the pleasure, the luck really, of interviewing Zoltan a couple of months ago. And I'm hoping to have him back at some point to ask him some of these questions and see how his opinion might or might not have
There
changed.
is no one smarter on the planet, in my opinion, than he is on the workings or the plumbing of the financial system. And he echoes a lot of the things maybe a little bit differently, but says a lot of the things that I say. And he'll tell you this is the beginning of the dollar as we know it. He calls us Bretton Woods 3. A lot of what I talk about, I glean from his viewpoint on things. And I think he's a very smart man.
You know what's challenging for me is as a beginner, someone who's trying to make sense of all this, like all at once, it's really overwhelming. It's like, trying to suck the Hoover Dam through a paper straw. It's really overwhelming to understand all these things. And what's also challenging to me is understanding who do I trust, who do I not trust? Because I talk to you, you make perfect sense to me. Then I talk to somebody with the exact opposite opinion, and they make perfect sense to me as well. And it's because a lot of this is also can be sensationalized. I'm going to put this video out. It's going to get quite a lot of views because there's going to be an interesting title on it. It's going to be a good thumbnail on it. It's going to get quite a lot of views. And it can be sensationalized. And that in and of itself makes the person biased to say more sensational things to get more increasing returns. In your case, you're the CEO of Miles Franklin, and you would obviously benefit if there's a higher demand for gold. And if somebody watching this goes,
but you know what, and this is not directed at you, okay? Because I hear that all the time, and this is not directed at you, but it pisses me off.
I'm just trying to figure it out.
It pisses me off to know when people say that, not you. I mean, because you say it very respectfully and eloquently. Most people say, "Oh, he's just talking his book." And that drives me nuts, because in what world does there have to be mutual exclusion between capitalism and good intentions? Can you not run a business and be a good guy and be someone who really wants to help people? Or is it just that if you make money running a business, and no one asked me that question in the 90s when I was struggling to pay my bills and struggling to keep the doors open. No one asked me that question, you know, from 2011 to 2017 when the price of gold was plummeting and everyone was selling gold to buy Bitcoin. It's just that you get these questions when the price of gold and silver go higher. I have had very strong fingertips and I've hung on for 33 years by doing things right. And I'm here to tell people that there is definitely the room to be capitalist, to build something that you are proud of, and to build a business that helps people and puts food on your table, and maybe a lot of food. Maybe it's given me things that I never, ever thought I could ever achieve. And that's what this country means to me. I am a patriot. But at the same time, you have these people say he's talking his book. And all I can tell you is that these people have never owned anything, if that's how they feel. They've never owned a business. They've never built a business and been a father at the same time. You can be a good guy. You can do the right thing for your family and your friends and your community and own a business too. And so, yes, it would benefit me to have this all over the place. I've done 9 billion in sales in 33 years. I don't need to stick my head out here and my neck out here and to say all of this stuff and to be on a pedestal or on a limb and taking all of the heat. I do it because it's something that, I don't know, it's cathartic for me to be able to talk to people about my feelings, because as the owner of one of the largest metals companies in the United States, most of my friends don't know what I do. I mean, my not my real friends, my people that live in my community. I don't talk about this with people because it's not something anyone wants to hear about. The sky's falling. Things are bad. Better protect yourself. Better have a gun. Better have gold. Better be out of debt. Who wants to hear that? Nobody. Maybe the people listening to your show does. And so I do this because I feel it's something that I'm supposed to do in a weird sort of way. But no, I'm not talking my book, and I don't care if people buy gold from me or not. I feel this is my role. This is something that I enjoy doing. I feel I'm helping even a little bit. And for those people who think that you can't be a capitalist and have good intentions and a good person, well, I would say you should try owning something and building something and then see if you feel that way. And ask someone that question when it's really not a good environment for that product or that company. You only seem to get that question when you know, there's demand for what it is that you're selling. And I don't know. I just think that it bothers me. So not to you, but just I think it's shallow-minded, shallow thinking, short-sightedness that make people say that kind of stuff.
No, I agree that you can absolutely. I mean, capitalism is good. It might be the cleanest shirt in the laundry basket as well, and it might be the worst system besides all the ones that came before it. To paraphrase someone many times smarter than me, but it can be possible. So again, I did not mean to offend you.
No, I'm not. That's not at you. And that's why I wanted to make that real clear. I've heard it 1,000 times over the last 3 years, just talking his book. No, I'm really not. I have the courage to say what most people don't. I was talking about this stuff in 2019 when nobody was. Everyone thought I was a kook. My wife said, Andy, you keep saying the same shit over and over and over and over again. I said, but no one's talking about it. Nobody. And now everyone is. And that's all verifiable. Go back and watch my videos. And I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to everyone out there. I found something that makes me feel like I'm contributing to the world even a little bit. And it is I put in a lot of time. I try to have integrity and honesty behind it. And yes, I built a business that I'm really proud of from nothing, from scratch. You know, we started a business in 1989 with a loan from my dad's best friend, whose middle name was Franklin. My dad's best name is Miles, in a room the size of your closet, and built it to 9 billion in sales without a customer complaint. I'm damn proud of what I've built. And and I've worked really hard. And that's part of why I'm so distraught by what's happening to this country, because the things that enabled me to do that are disappearing. And I take exception when people say that. It was not in any way directed at you, just more my anger when people who are very narrow-minded say things like that, and it happens too often.
Well, thank you for that clarification. It was just sort of me also sharing frustration in trying to manage this whole landscape of having 1,000 different websites to have different viewpoints and everyone makes sense.
Sure.
And managing that
that's
is
what
just
learning is. See, that's what learning is. This country has become so damn intolerant that you can't have another viewpoint. See, but what you're saying is what made this country great. You listen to other people's viewpoints, even if they're diametrically opposed to the last one you read or listened to, and then you use your brain to figure out what is the most plausible outcome. Now, Occam's razor, and anyone who just listens to one viewpoint is foolish. And anyone who isn't tolerant of other viewpoints will never grow or never learn, and they'll be stagnant. So I am open to listening to other viewpoints. In fact, I welcome them, because I don't ever want to be married to my, when I do an interview with Robert Kiyosaki or Michelle McCory and it gets 1.5 million views, I don't want to be married to my viewpoint if it's wrong. I welcome people to push back and let me try and think my way out of that one. And if I can't, I'll be the first one to admit it. But that's what I mean by being respectful of other and tolerant of other viewpoints. Now you're defined as a person by who you voted for in the last election. And that is not the country that I grew up in. It's changing. And I don't like that. So that's what I mean by this country being great. And the things that have made it great are being denigrated by a new ideology that is very divergent from what this country has always stood for, in my opinion.
So using my brain, I guess, is the key point here, which is not necessarily my strong side.
I don't believe that one bit. I think you're pretty smart, and I think you get it, and you listen to other viewpoints. You've made that abundantly clear, and you're conflicted with it. But that's what learning is. If all you do is read one philosophy, and then 20, 30 years later, you read the other side, you're like, my God, what was I thinking? You have to have other viewpoints.
Yeah, well, I have that on the weekly because I talk to people on the weekly. I'm like, okay, this makes perfect sense. Then I go to the next one. I'm like, okay, what was I thinking? So that happens to me on the weekly now, which I guess, I'm hoping long-term that's going to be beneficial to me. But of course it is. Andy, you've been incredibly generous with your time.
There's pieces of truth in everything. There's pieces of truth. Nothing is absolute. So the fact that you do that is very, very important. It says a lot about you and your role as a commentator. I can't watch mainstream news anymore. I could vomit because they only look at things from one angle and they ignore the other side. A half-truth is a lie, and like Bill Clinton saying, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. It's a lie. It's a half-truth. It's rhetoric, so I appreciate the way that you conduct yourself and the way that you have an open mind to look at the world through a broader lens rather than a polarized one, and see it, in for what it is. A lot of different viewpoints and a very dynamic and fluid environment that is changing. And that's really the genesis of everything I'm talking about. It's changing. What and how it all looks in the end, don't know yet. But I can tell you that it is moving away from the way that we all have grown up in this country or in the United States. I know you're not in the United States, but anyways, the point is the same. And it's a compliment to you nonetheless. And it's been my pleasure to be here. And, we should pick back up in a few months and see just how right or wrong I have been. And if I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong. I tell that in every interview. I got a 16-year-old daughter and 2 other older kids. I hope I'm wrong. And if I am, the world that my kids are going out into will be a better place to be.
Your dog wants to join the interview. I would definitely.
They hear the UPS truck pulling up, so it's all good. Anyways, it was a pleasure to be here with you, Antonio, and I'd like to do it again. I think you do a wonderful job, and more than anything, what impresses me is how well-rounded your viewpoint is. And That's what's important when you try and unpack what's happening around us.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being so generous with your time. I really appreciate it.
You got it, brother. I hope to talk to you again soon.